To hell with being a saint. I'm a doctor. Chapter 10. The beginning of swordsmanship. Alicia entered the bedroom and announced, "It's Alicia." Did you truly instruct the saint to die? She found herself speechless in response to the Count's blunt question. Silence often served as confirmation. The Count understood that his daughter had cursed the saint, none other than the saint himself. What should I do about this? Is this the end of our family lineage in my generation? The saint possessed the authority of being God's representative and immense power, a godlike human in the human world. That was the saint. However, the other party was not the commonly known saint, but perhaps a divine being. Even a single word from him, as if passing by their kingdom, could claim their lives. They had committed such a transgression, and he had the power to enforce it. Viscount Gade furrowed his brow and placed his hand on his forehead. Now, rather than reprimanding his daughter, there was something more crucial to prioritize. Fortin, locate the saint immediately, as discreetly and swiftly as possible. As soon as the Count's words fell, Fortin, the butler, bowed his head. I will send people to search for him. Viscount Gade added, If we didn't know, then he's an unknown saint to the world. I don't understand why the Holy Kingdom didn't take him in and protect him, but that's the situation. When you commission the Information Guild, don't ask them to find the saint, but rather, search for him based on his appearance and age. Understood. After providing the detailed instructions to Fortin, Viscount Gade turned to Alicia and spoke to her in a voice that was neither too loud nor too soft. As a noble, even when you are angry or sad, don't display it publicly. Your emotions could destroy all of us, your family. Alicia recoiled at his stern words. Tears welled up in her eyes, appearing as if they would spill at any moment. Viscount Gade gently stroked her hair and said, I'm not telling you to discard your emotions. Only reveal your emotions to those you can genuinely trust. That is the highest form of trust one can receive as a human in the noble world. His words resonated softly in the bedroom. Eventually, Alicia succumbed to tears in front of Viscount Gade. I'm sorry, Dad. Viscount Gade shut his eyes as he comforted his daughter, who was weeping in his arms. At Alicia's age, she should have been making friends and frolicking in gardens. But Alicia was a noble lady. Therefore, she always had to be cautious in her actions, and in situations like this, she had to assume responsibility. That was for her benefit, and educating her about her family lineage and nobility was the least he could do for his daughter. The 14-year-old girl, born into nobility, led a life devoid of freedom. He found this lamentable, and tears welled up in his eyes at the thought of his precious daughter having to exist in the noble world in the future. Now, the only thing he could do for his daughter was to instruct her on how to survive in this world. Perhaps it would be better for Alicia if our family lineage ended here. Feeling a surge of various emotions for the first time in a while, the Count quietly shifted his gaze towards the window. As a noble and a father, he was not permitted to show tears to anyone. Ray, from today on, come out every morning. You are old enough, so it seems about time you learn how to wield a sword. When Ale spoke, Ray put down his spoon while consuming soup and nodded his head. Yeah, I wanted to try learning too. It won't be easy. You might learn while getting hit. Ale felt immense happiness in doing something with his son. That is strong. I might die if I get hit by the sword he swings with that powerful arm. Ray started to compliment Ale. They say flattery makes even a whale dance. Ale, being human, was 3 times more delighted. All right. I'll go easy on you. Ale laughed foolishly, while Sane rested her chin on her hand, observing him. Who's going to watch out for whom? Don't get beaten by your kid. Are you mocking me? They both acknowledged that Ray was unusually strong. Even if they gave their best effort, they doubted they could resist his overwhelming mana density. Therefore, Ale had a plan. "Ray, no magic during swordsmanship training time," Ale announced confidently, causing Sane to chuckle. "Is that your strategy?" "Experience the grandeur of a father." Ray didn't fully grasp why Ale was so fixated on the grandeur of a father, but he felt that growing a beard would explain everything. "Understood. So no magic, correct?" "Yes, I'll permit the use of mana." Ray grinned mischievously at Ale's words. He could even form a surgical scalpel with mana. Just because he couldn't use mana didn't mean his comprehension of mana vanished. The difference would arise from the proficiency and experience in swordsmanship. If he mastered that aspect, he could defeat Ale. Both father and son believed they had the upper hand. The lesson commenced in the spacious yard. Ray received a short wooden stick from Ale. It appeared crude, likely carven from a log, resembling a wooden sword. So it's a double-edged sword, not a Japanese katana. Although he had vaguely considered it, the concept of a Japanese katana didn't exist in this world. In this realm, where swordsmanship prioritizing power was cultivated, a Japanese katana was merely a disposable object that couldn't even deflect an attack, let alone withstand one. Ray gripped the handle firmly and assumed the stance. It was the posture commonly referred to as kendo in modern times. "I'm fortunate I learned kendo in my youth." He had studied kendo for self-defense since he was 5 years old in modern times. He stopped attending by the time he reached high school, but he had practiced diligently, so his stance was impeccable. Ale was perplexed by his son's form, despite it being his first time wielding a sword. Initially, he assumed he would need to correct an unsteady stance. However, Ray's stance was evidently practical. With the sword at the center, it appeared there would be no issue with any kind of thrust. It also seemed as though he could hold off an opponent approaching from the front. I might actually get hit." Ale relaxed his body and spoke in a low voice. "Your stance looks good. Go ahead and attack first." "Okay." As soon as Ray finished speaking, he dashed towards Ale's side. He swung the sword diagonally, targeting Ale's shoulder, but Ale was ready and effortlessly parried the sword swung by Ray. When a sword is parried, an opening is created. Ale seized this opportunity. "Take this, you brat." The attack aimed at the shoulder, just like Ray's, was supposed to hit Ray's shoulder directly. No, it was supposed to. Suddenly, Ray's drawn black sword was blocking Ale's attack once again. When did he? Ray parried the sword without leaving any room for error. The sword, filled with an abundance of mana, clashed with Ale's, causing a recoil. His high-density mana easily repelled Ale's infused mana. As a result, Ale almost lost his grip on his sword. If he didn't have combat experience deeply ingrained in his body, he would have dropped the sword. He's truly like a genius. I don't know where he learned it, but it's a swordsmanship technique I've never seen. Ale believed Ray had invented this sword technique. It might be unthinkable for someone his age to invent a sword technique, but Ray had always been like this. His study and comprehension of mana was unparalleled even when compared to the mage, Sane. Sane would surely lose if they debated solely about magic, but about mana. Swinging his sword, Ale asked, "What's that technique? Did you invent it?" Parrying the sword aimed at his chin, Ray responded, "Yes, I did a good job creating it, didn't I? Not sure if it's practical though." Seeing his son speak with a hint of a smile, Ale's heart swelled. "Made it well." "Yes, you did, you little rascal. It makes me want to learn it. Should we speed up then?" Ale activated the mana within him. Suddenly, his sword moved with terrifying speed. Ray struggled to deflect it and stepped back. "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn while you're getting hit." "How cruel." It wasn't just speed, but also increased power. The pressure from his descending sword could even be felt by himself. Ray had no choice but to step back once more. Running away again. If Dad keeps coming at me like that, I have my own plans. Just don't use magic. It's not magic. Good then. Ale wanted to see what move his son would make next. Watching him, Ray tilted his head. Not attacking? Damn it. A man has his pride. How can I attack now? Just do it quickly. It was like villains who waited for the heroes to transform. Ray smirked and said, You won't regret this? A man doesn't go back on his word. Ale said with a serious face, but he soon regretted it. Mana started gathering around Ray, and soon all of it infused into his sword. This created the so-called sword aura, which is hard to produce. Though it wasn't as destructive or sharp as the aura blade, which only sword masters could produce, there obviously weren't any kids of Ray's age who could create a sword aura. Moreover, it was a sword aura based solely on his understanding of mana. Its length was equal to the length of his thigh. Holding a sword longer than himself, Ray said, Now it's fair. Let's go again. Fair my foot. How is this fair? Chapter 11. Ale pointed at the sky, his urge to scream out loud overwhelming him. At 15, he's using sword aura. I could barely mimic it when I was over 20. Having mastered sword aura at the age of 20, Ale was far from untalented. No, on the contrary, he could be regarded as a prodigy. But what about Ray, who had entered the realm of aura users at the tender age of 15? That concludes today's lesson. Eventually, Ale admitted defeat. Observing this, Sane commented disdainfully, Is that all for today? At least you weren't defeated. Defeated? Are you suggesting I should beat my own son? Isn't learning through punishment a valid method? Continue the lesson, teacher. Having said that, there was nothing more to add. He clenched his teeth and channeled mana into his sword. In an instant, a blue aura conjugated on the sword, and the sword aura ascended. The aura was undeniably denser than Ray's, distinct from Ray's, which was formed merely by comprehending mana. Ale smirked and declared, All right, now we're really starting. Seeing his stance, Ray swallowed hard. Am I truly going to learn through punishment? Ray enjoyed dealing blows, but not receiving them. Furthermore, the idea of being hit by another man was utterly unacceptable. He tightened his grip on the sword handle, and immediately, Ale's sword swung towards him. His sword aura, radiating a sharp force, was intercepted by Ray's sword. Kagang! Though it should have been the sound of wooden swords clashing, a noise resembling the friction of metal resonated, and sparks scattered everywhere. I'm going to be forced back at this rate. Ray's expression turned serious. His hastily constructed sword aura was weaker than Ale's. No matter how much he channeled his pure and orderly mana into the sword of a genuine aura user, forged through experience and enlightenment, was unimaginably powerful. In the end, before the test of strength commenced, Ray had no option but to retreat. Furthermore, Ale was in a state of physically enhancing himself with mana, which made him several times faster and stronger than Ray. It hurts! Ray's grip was torn due to the brief collision, unable to withstand the shock. If it continues like this, I'll keep getting pushed back. I need to find a way. The more he realized it, the more he realized he relied on mana. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he relied on magic. Furthermore, facing Ale, who was continuously attacking without waiting like before, it was not easy to even think. On the other hand, Ale was at ease. Don't worry too much. I'll remove the aura when I hit you. Ray gritted his teeth at his father's annoying words. It's come to this. I'll push through with quantity. Ray sighed and once again retreated. He then began to absorb all the surrounding mana without leaving any behind. It felt as if the air itself was moving. Both Ale and Sane were surprised by the enormous flow of mana. The mana being pulled towards him was immensely vast, as if he was gathering all the mana in the world. Strong and pure mana gathered and began to condense on the sword held in Rei's hand. As mana was infused, the sword aura naturally had to increase in size. The sword aura that sprang from Rei's sword grew larger and larger. Eventually, when the sword surrounded by mana became about 3 times the size of Rei's body, the flow of mana stopped. Sain and Ale, watching the scene, were at a loss for words. It was absurdly magnificent. They wondered if their son had a fountain of mana sprouting from within him. Rei wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. Phew, is this fair now? Now, there was no rationality left to answer. In a dark place in Billow Village, figures were busy moving around. They were all information merchants. Most of them were acting on the request of the Gatebearer Net family. The family's survival hung in the balance, so they did not hesitate to send requests to the information guilds and black merchants. In the deepest part of the alley, behind the tavern's back door, 2 figures stood facing each other. A bald man in a hood voiced his disbelief. Is that really all? Yes. The bald man thumped his chest and said, No. I intended to give it my all because I received a bit more for the initiation fee, but to find someone based on hair color and age range. What kind of absurdity is this? His counterpart's expression twisted slightly. I know that's tough. That's why you were paid a lot of money. Even with a lot of money, the impossible remains impossible. How many people do you think share the same hair color? Moreover, it's not even a specific physical feature, but an age range. Don't worry about the hair color. The person is a boy with white hair. The bald man cocked his head at his words. That person. Finding someone with such pure white hair is quite rare. I believe he might be the only one in that age range. It was unclear who this man was that the bald man was speaking so respectfully to, but having received the initiation fee, the bald man was obligated to do the job. All right, I'll do my best to find him, focusing on the village. I anticipate good news, the man said as he rose from his seat. Soon, he quickly exited the alley and vanished, leaving the bald man to rub his head and mutter to himself. Showing respect to a kid, telling me to find him just by hair color. Has the world lost its mind? Holy Kingdom Gaia, a country rich in history and significance, having produced saints and holy women through revelation since ancient times. As always, the Pope of this holy kingdom knelt, his hands clasped together in prayer. The sight of him, radiating divine power while engrossed in his prayer, was such that everyone would step aside and leave him be. Approximately 3 hours had passed when a voice began to resonate in the Pope's mind. Your devotion is admirable. Tears welled up in the Pope's eyes as he heard the affectionate voice in his mind. Oh Lord, my Lord! This was the first answer to his ceaseless prayers since his papacy began. Despite his tears, Lord Gaia continued to speak. My child of faith, seek the new saint. Find him in the nation of Cilia, the one with white hair. As her voice echoed, the Pope tilted his head in puzzlement. Is that all? Instead of a compliant reply, the Pope questioned as if wondering if that was truly everything, and she responded, What do you mean? In the kingdom of Cilia, there are many people with white hair. Even in their holy kingdom, there are a significant number. Searching for a saint in such a place could result in the worst-case scenario of not finding him until his death. Gaia sighed at the Pope, who was lowering his head as he spoke. The new saint is 15 years old. Find him and bring him to the Holy Kingdom. Yes, I understand. As the Pope's response echoed, the voice that had been lingering in his mind vanished without a trace. It felt as if he had just awakened from a dream, and a small sigh escaped the Pope's lips. The joy of finally receiving a response from the God he worshipped did not diminish, even though he seemed to sigh at the end. The following day, the Holy Kingdom promptly informed the Kingdom of Cilia that they would be searching for the saint. Given that the revelation had been granted, if Cilia refused, the Holy Kingdom would declare a holy war, leaving Cilia with no choice but to comply. The Holy Kingdom's delegation and intelligence agency were the first to go to the Kingdom of Cilia, followed by the dispatch force that would begin the search for the individual. The dispatch force was composed entirely of holy knights, clerics, and priests. Their combat power naturally surpassed that of a typical knight order. The dispatch force was divided into 3 groups: the upper, middle, and lower groups. The upper guard consisted of the most skilled individuals. Following them were the middle and lower guards. Typically, when the 3 groups were united, the upper guard assumed the role of leadership. Given their trait of enhancing their divine power as their faith increased or as they earned their god's trust, the upper guard usually had the oldest members, while the lower guard had the youngest. 2 knights from the lower guard were in conversation. "The new saint is quite young, isn't he? We already have a holy woman, and now there's a revelation about a new saint. Well, if we gain one more saint, our holy kingdom will expand even further." True. There's never been such an instance in history. In the history of the continent, including the Holy Kingdom, there had never been a period when 2 saints and a holy woman emerged in the same era. Since the Pope, who had received the revelation from their God, had issued the command, they were not seeking a potential saint, but a saint who was a child. Unlike the holy woman who came to the Holy Kingdom, was baptized, and received divine power from the God, this child was a saint from the start. They were eager to see what kind of child he would be. An upper guard cleric noticed their chatter and issued a warning. "Do not create a disturbance. We are about to uphold the divine words of our Lord. I will not tolerate any frivolity." At his words, the 2 knights immediately straightened their stances and lowered their heads. "We apologize. We will be more careful." "Sorry." Accepting their apologies, the cleric slightly shook his head. He understood too. Being young, it was inevitable that they would be unrestrained. Even in the Holy Kingdom, it remained a secret to other countries, but there were instances where young and energetic holy knights, clerics, and priests violated the doctrine and were excommunicated, leading the lower guard involved, handling a plethora of nonsensical matters. And there was also those who slipped into the forest to secretly share their love. He had sternly reprimanded them, but the cleric understood that it was not easy for them to live a life of restraint and devotion to God alone. That's why he deliberately spoke more strictly to instill discipline in them to prevent reaching the worst case scenario. Chapter 12. Ray's sword was overwhelmingly large. Merely holding the sword and standing there, it exuded an intimidation that was no ordinary feat. No matter how dense Ael's sword aura might have been, it wasn't powerful enough to overcome such a significant reach difference. This guy, playing dirty. Who started playing dirty first? Ray smirked and adjusted his grip on the sword. Even though he merely adjusted the handle, the sword aura was so massive that it grazed past Ael's nose. "Ael, surrender," Sain suggested. But what would become of a man's pride if he surrendered here? Ael was a man who knew how to preserve his dignity. "Fine, bring it on." "I'm really going for it." Ray took a step and raised his sword diagonally. With just one more step, Ael had to take 2 steps back to block it. Kagang! A loud noise echoed as Ael exhaled sharply. It wasn't just the size that had increased. The density of the sword aura had risen as well. Of course, as a beginner aura user, he couldn't surpass his own aura. However, it wasn't as pitifully inadequate as it had been initially. Despite the unexpectedly large size, Ael approached while parrying Ray's attacks. No matter how large it was, that was all there was to it. All he had to do was avoid blocking it head-on. However, Ray seemed to know this as he refrained from slashing vertically or horizontally as much as possible. He always sliced diagonally, and if Ale began parrying, Ray would withdraw his sword like a ghost. It was clear he knew exactly when to unleash and withdraw his sword. No matter how beginner level he might have been as an aura user, the size of his sword was unparalleled. Even with a careless swing, Ale had to give his best to block or parry it. However, flaws in swordsmanship are bound to be expected. Even though he had learned modern kendo, it was significantly inferior compared to the swordsmanship in this world where people live with their swords strapped to their waists. The key was to determine the victor before Ale adapted to this unfamiliar swordsmanship. Ray gritted his teeth. The timing for counterattacking is starting to align. I need to hurry. Instead of parrying, Ale had begun to block more, indicating he was adapting to his swordsmanship. Just as Ray was growing impatient, Ale closed the distance. With the sword being so large, it was challenging to retrieve it immediately. Ray had no option but to concede the distance to Ale. Ale swiftly blocked the sword with the handle and attempted to create distance again. But at that moment, Ale's foot shot out, striking his hand squarely. Thump. For a moment, Ray felt nothing in his hand. Naturally, the sword soared high in the air before falling to the ground. Staring blankly at the airborne sword, Ray eventually collapsed to the ground in significant pain. I won. Ale laughed and casually strode towards him, discarding his own sword to the side. Then he started calling out loudly for Sane. Sane, Ray is hurt. Please treat him. Sane had gone inside to do some housework in the middle of the battle, so she rushed out when she heard Ale's call. Huh? Who is hurt? Oh! Having some medical knowledge, she briefly touched Ray's hand. Ow! That hurts! He screamed in pain, a sensation he had never experienced in his lifetime. Having never been seriously injured before, he didn't know that pain could feel this intense. After briefly touching his hand, a thoughtful expression crossed her face. The bone is injured. Ale also stuttered in response. The bone is injured. Honestly, Ale hadn't considered what to do with his son's hand at all. Engaged in combat and unable to shake off the sensation of fighting a novice aura user, he inadvertently treated him like a regular aura user. This was undeniably his error. Furthermore, when Sane noticed that Ray's hand was torn from the clash with Ale, she glared at Ale fiercely. Ale grimaced, pondering how he should apologize. Sensing that his father might be severely reprimanded, Ray forced a smile. Naturally, the pain was too intense to merely laugh away. It's okay, I can heal it with magic. With that, he cast a spell on his arm. Heal! Mana flowed forth and instantly enveloped his hand. Sane had seen a deer die due to Ray's healing, so she was quite concerned. However, she merely observed silently, believing that her intelligent son wouldn't cause any issues. In reality, Ray's healing magic required a mana road that could endure his absurd mana density to be effective. Naturally, the deer had to die because it lacked a mana road to withstand Ray's mana. Mana gathered around Ray's hand, emitting a bright light. The overwhelming intensity of the light was enough to temporarily blind them. It's dazzling. As the light gradually faded and they could discern their surroundings, Sane quickly looked at Ray's hand. She then froze in place. Ray's hand had returned to its normal healthy state. Observing the scene, Ale was speechless. Huh? He was surprised himself. It was merely a simple first circle healing magic. Casting it didn't mean that the injury would instantly heal or revert to its previous state. Yet Ray's hand had completely healed. Sane, seemingly in disbelief, grabbed Ray's hand again. The bone has healed. Even though he's my son, it's hard to believe. Ray clenched and unclenched his hand, moving it around for a moment. Does it feel any different from before? Upon gently touching it, there was no doubt that the bone had healed completely and returned to its original state. The torn flesh of the palm had also completely healed. She hadn't known that the healing magic, which was supposed to take the life of the deer as its mission, could be this effective. She had thought it would just heal the wound a bit, but it was as if his hand was in a better state than before the sparring. Priest wouldn't be able to heal it this fast either. Ale joked, but Sane nodded in agreement. That's true. Didn't you fail to use heal last time? Yeah, I failed that time. But why is it possible now? I don't know. Sensing it was time to explain, as his parents murmured, Ray felt it was better to speak up before Ale and Sane asked. Mom, Dad, I have something to tell you about my magic. Can I talk about it over lunch? I'm a bit hungry right now. Although it was still early, Ray, hungry from the sparring, looked at Sane and spoke. Sane, seeing Ray rush for food in a way she hadn't seen before, put a hand to her cheek and murmured, So cute. Ale's expression softened, as if he was looking at something pitiful. That's an illness too. Ale apologized for what happened in the yard. Despite it being their first sparring, he was proud of his son's unexpected strength, and in the end, he made a mistake. But he wasn't the only one trying to win. Sane felt the same way, so she was able to laugh it off. All of it was his mistake, but Sane felt pride as well. After apologizing, Ale told Ray what he needed to improve on, having felt it during their sparring. Using excessive mana to create a sword aura is inefficient, so be careful. But that was all he said. However, Ray didn't have any limitations on his mana, so no matter how large he made it, it wouldn't be a burden. As they talked, soon the table was filled with food. Looking at the sumptuously set table, Ray swallowed his saliva. For the first time since his birth, he had exerted his body so strenuously, so Sane had thoughtfully prepared a lot of food for Ray. Upon seeing this, Ale's eyes widened in surprise. It feels like we're newlyweds again. Just after their marriage, Sane used to set the table with an extraordinary amount of care. She prepared so much food that it seemed impolite not to finish it all. But after 2 years, the amount of food on the table began to decrease, and it became the norm. Having grown accustomed to the usual table setting, Ale shed tears at the sight of that day's meal. This is it. This is what care looks like. After a long time, I wanted to showcase my cooking skills. Eat a lot, my son. Ray returned his mother's smile. I'll eat well. Okay, let's eat. After saying that, he brought the food to his mouth. The moment the food entered his mouth, an indescribable emotion surged within him like a tidal wave. The hunger that had been gnawing at his stomach disappeared in an instant. This is really delicious, Mom. Sane smiled contentedly at that. Eat a lot. Ale spoke as he put meat in his mouth and chewed. But you mentioned you had something to discuss, right? The moment had finally arrived. He didn't expect them to understand everything about him. Honestly, who would believe him if he had claimed he had felt the energy of mana since he was a child? And he had to explain about his unique mana path as well. Ray took a small breath and looked at their faces before broaching the subject. Did you guys ever think I was odd when I was little? You were odd. Definitely odd. Ray was quite taken aback by his parents' immediate and unanimous response. No matter how much he anticipated that answer, he didn't think they would respond so promptly. In what ways was I odd? Everything. Yeah, the kid didn't cry much either. He had nothing to say in response. Although he was flustered to the point where his mind went blank, Ray took another deep breath and spoke. Truthfully, I had been feeling mana since I was a child. But you're still a child, aren't you? You're a child. Seriously. What I mean is, I began to feel mana when I was 3 months old. Ray had begun to feel mana when he was just 3 months old. Of course, he couldn't do anything with it. He could only literally feel it. But this was enough to captivate Sane and Ale's attention. As he expected, this time, Ale and Sane were also surprised. As expected,
Our son!
Yes, that's my son. But it wasn't the reaction he had wanted. Ray sighed deeply. What circle do you think I'm in now? Neither of them could answer this question hastily. After a moment of thought, Sane answered first. Since you can cast first circle spells without an incantation, maybe the third circle? What are you talking about? Although I don't know the specifics, Ray's mana density is very high. Just by looking at that, you can say he's at least in the fourth circle. Ray quietly spoke amidst their debate. I have no circle. Chapter 13. Does the circle not exist? Ale and Sane were confused. What was a circle? It was the most crucial element for a mage. Mana became stagnant if it remained static. Thus, a circulating system known as the circle was developed within the body. The circle constantly circulated the trapped mana within the body to prevent it from being stagnant. What if this vital circle did not exist? Then one would not be able to trap mana within the body, and naturally, one would not be able to use magic. The more circles there were, the more power the mana gained, and the more vigorously it could rotate larger amounts. Generally, mana that had been rotated more was more active and powerful than mana that had been rotated less. I literally do not have a circle. I don't need a circle to draw and use mana. However, what he was saying now did not make sense. A mage using magic without a circle. It was akin to a saint lacking divine power. I still don't understand.
Neither do I. You need a circle to draw in mana. Initially, the mana road itself is connected to the circle.
That's the thing. My mana road is different from other mages. Normally, mana roads are designed to meet the circle and send the most rotationally powerful mana quickly, right?
That's correct. If the mana road is separated from the circle, the rotationally weakened mana passing through the mana road will be consumed when casting a spell. That will significantly reduce the destructive power.
The mage Sane was knowledgeable in this area. But Ray shook his head and said, People generally believe that the more active mana is, the stronger it is. But that's not true. The purest state of mana is the strongest. Mana floating in the air or contained in all things can itself be a weapon. Even as she listened to his explanation, Sane could not easily believe it. The knowledge she had about mana had been ingrained in her mind for almost 30 years. She also thought that she understood mana to some extent. Sane grasped the concept of the pure state of mana that Ray discussed, but she couldn't comprehend why it was more potent than rotationally enhanced mana. Interpreting Sane's thoughts, Ray extended his hand and instructed, Mom, can you push your mana here? As if you're repelling my mana?
Huh? Alright.
Increase the rotational force and release it all at once. Sane expressed her concern to Ray.
If I do that, you'll be sent flying.
Don't worry about me. Just give it a try. Sane murmured that Ray was adorable as she observed his hand gestures. Then she did as Ray requested, gathering her mana. The mana traveled through her mana road to the circle where it began to rotate fiercely. Witnessing this, Ray felt a shiver run down his spine. As expected of Mom, I have no idea how many circles she possesses, but the pressure is immense. Sane typically exhibited a playful demeanor and rarely lost her temper, so Ray hadn't recognized it, but she was known as a top-tier mage in the world. If she wasn't a top-tier mage, Ray couldn't envision how many stronger entities existed elsewhere. Sane's potent energy was thrust into Ray's mana. Quakwang! A massive surge of mana swirled around Ray. Air Hand! She promptly cast a spell to shield Ray from being swept away by the mana clash. However, Ray effortlessly deflected Sane's mana without her assistance. Instead of being propelled backwards, he dissipated her mana in the same spot, with both arms extended as they were initially. Ray slowly lifted his head and stated, Utilizing pure mana rather than rotating mana is far more efficient. Plus, it's more powerful. Ray didn't appear to exert any effort while speaking. Sane's pupils flickered momentarily. It wasn't her maximum strength, but it was a considerable force.
Saying had expected Ray to counter her mana, but she didn't anticipate that it would be so effortless for him. She hadn't realized until now, but after their mana clash, she understood. Ray might indeed be correct. It was difficult to believe that such precise and well-structured words were coming from a 15-year-old boy. Furthermore, he demonstrated it through an experiment. The procedure and the outcome even convinced Sane herself. It might have seemed to be an impossible concept, but there could be a day when one could use magic without a circle. Ray lifted a finger as if to suggest that was not the only point and continued. The power of mana is potent, and pure mana is denser than impure mana. Naturally, denser mana is stronger. He then began to wrap mana around his raised finger. To enhance cutting power with such mana, it's sufficient to simply increase the density of mana like this. As he spoke, his finger moved and a teacup began to peel like a fruit. Chika, chika. Even though he was slicing glass, Sane was astonished to see it cut so smoothly. What he was demonstrating was not magic. It was something akin to sword aura created by controlling mana. His dense mana was fundamentally very powerful in cutting power when shaped into a blade. After peeling the teacup, Ray carefully placed it down and said, "However, in the case of explosive power, increasing the density doesn't necessarily augment the destructive power. Of course, adding rotational force doesn't make the mana stronger either." Sane stroked her chin and nodded after a moment of contemplation. "I see. Now I comprehend. But I still don't grasp how you can use magic without a circle." "That's because I established a unique mana road different from others." "You constructed it differently from others. What if something goes awry?" Ale voiced his concern. "Indeed, a mana road is a source from where the body's energy is drawn. If something goes wrong there, it could have a lethal impact. In the past, there were accounts of mages who did not adhere to the conventional manas for mana roads and instead forged their own paths. Some were documented to have lost their ability to wield magic, became incapacitated, or even coughed up blood and died. However, these incidents occurred due to misinformation or a lack of information. To understand how it functioned and how to construct it most efficiently, a concept akin to a highway was necessary. All that needed to be done was to separate the central lane and prevent the flowing mana from colliding. While it was impossible for others, he possessed medical knowledge. Therefore, he could construct a mana road comparable to blood vessels. Because he had such lucid thoughts, he was somewhat worried, but since there was no theoretical issues, he decided to give it a try. Ray dismissed Ale's concerns with a laugh. "Nothing adverse will occur. I believe it will have far fewer issues than the existing mana roads." However, Sane and Ale couldn't simply laugh and accept his words. Creating a mana road was not something just anyone could do. Even those hailed as grand masters in the realm of magic failed at pioneering new mana roads. Therefore, mages who successfully pioneered mana roads established clans and passed down their methods as a tradition only to the direct heirs of the clan. One thing was certain: just because a new mana road was created, it didn't guarantee it was superior to the existing ones. Not many wizards would be willing to gamble on such an adventure, because everyone has only one precious life. From this alone, one could see how audacious Ray's actions was. Ale mulled over what Ray had said. After only 3 months, to sense mana and later to pave a mana road. At the very least, he accomplished it by the time he was 4. Is that even feasible? It's plausible since Ray was currently using magic, but wasn't that a bit too much? Ale felt like pointing to the sky in frustration. Even a genius should have some limits. He wished the heavens would set a benchmark for geniuses. "If that's the case for you, so due to that unique mana road, you can use magic without a circle." "Yes, the usual way wizards manifest magic is by confining the mana within their bodies." As Ray spoke, he drew mana. Mana floating in the air flowed directly through his body. Deliberately, when he drew mana, he gathered a large amount at once, then circulated it through his body. Sane, who believed Ray's typical absorption of mana was to imprison it within his body, was quite surprised. "You don't absorb mana." With a clap, Sane looked pleased at having guessed it correctly, to which Ray nodded. "That's right. I don't absorb and store mana in my body. My mana road pulls or directly converts ambient mana to manifest magic, so naturally, I don't need a circle." "Well, indeed, if that's the case, there's no need for a circle."
Sane said this, but her expression was one of a wry smile.
"To think that such a mana road could be created."
The village of Billow was teeming with information brokers. It was only expected, as the nobleman had intentionally invested money into the area. The influx of substantial funds had the information guilds and black market dealers grinning from ear to ear. However, there was one thing that none of the information brokers could understand. Why was the nobleman trying to find that child? A daughter from another noble family? A nobleman's secret son? Many stories emerged, but none were believable. So many information guilds were placing counter requests with the merchants about the child the nobleman was looking for. If it turned out to be a significant matter worth a lot of money, they wanted to be involved in it too, albeit belatedly. Therefore, even on sunny days, there were people walking around Billow Village with their hoods up, and at night, the streets were crowded with adventurers and mercenaries. Indeed, most of them were information brokers, black market dealers, and their acquaintances. But to an outsider, the village of Billow appeared like a bustling street beyond imagination. Such was the case for the adventurers who visited Billow Village for tourism or quests. "Wow, I wasn't aware of this village before, but it seems to have expanded significantly." "Yeah, it wasn't in our plan, but we might as well take a break here for a while." As adventurers and mercenaries gathered, the difficulty, quantity, and rewards of quests provided by the guild naturally escalated. When they notified their guild, which shared information with fellow adventurers, more people swarmed to Billow Village. Gone were the tranquil and serene days of the past in Billow Village. Ironically, the nobleman who had invested money into the village to find Ray was now earning more money than he had spent as the village thrived. Furthermore, with the influx of commoners and merchants, the nobleman's power grew stronger each day. The population, comparable to a small city, and the merchant groups attracted by the scent of money, brought in adventurers, and with the increasing population and economic power, the nobleman's influence naturally expanded. Yet, despite all this, the nobleman's quest had never seemed to be called off. Instead, the number of quests had multiplied. At least until he found the saint, the nobleman could not afford to stop investing money.